Hello and welcome back. This is part 2 of our special presentation on priorities for principals as we work to implement the Common Core state standards and college and career ready practices, a special presentation of the Center for College and Career Readiness and the Common Core Institute. My name is Kevin Baird. I'm the chairman here. A reminder that this content is normally provided in a 3-hour on-site type workshop. So I'll give you some hints and helps when you might want to pause if you're listening to this with a group and do some reflection. Also, if you haven't seen part 1 is about the requirements of the Common Core standards. Part 2 now is about key priority areas to focus upon. Everything that we talk about today is aligned to the National Pathway for Common Core State Standards Implementation. A reminder, the pathway says that we have to begin by building deep capacity inside of our schools. We begin with what we call our black belts. They are essentially people who are as trained as any kind of outside consultant, and then we look at our lead teachers, our pioneers who volunteer, and our principals, our leadership teams. We must ensure that our leadership teams are supported so that they can become the instructional coaches and leaders on demand in our buildings. We must consider the implementation of curriculum, instruction, and assessment in tandem at the same time. Remember, we can't just change our stuff. We must change the way that we actually approach instruction and the assessment approaches inside of the classroom. So 1, we have good formative information, but 2, so that we are assessing in the same type of way that we're going to see on the new assessments, that definition of college and career readiness. Everything is discussed through a lens of sustainable change. It doesn't matter if we do it, if it doesn't continue. So, the 5 elements for a sustainable implementation, remember. When you look over at the right-hand side, anxiety, our teachers have anxiety if we don't identify their skill needs and we don't help them with their skills. We don't help them with whatever kind of professional development they need. The same is true with our leadership teams. What's your vision for your building? What are the skills that are needed to do the work? What are the incentives? What resources? Remember, our resources that are most important are in our heads. And then what's the plan? I'd like to note thanks to my friends at the University of Southern California, Rossier, and Common Core Black Belt certification. I've stolen a lot of materials from them here for our free presentation today. A reminder, I love to give away things. We have a number of grant programs with those partners and other things that are free. So if you are interested after the presentation, there are things here that resonate that you know you need to do. You can contact Tim Edwards at tim.edwards@collegecareer.org, and he will hook you up with information. I'm going to be showing you examples of assessment items from the consortia, brand new research. We can get you any of that information. So 5 priorities for implementation. The last segment, section number 1, part 1, was about the requirements of the Common Core. How do we do that? We can't do it all at once. We have to focus. Where do we need to focus? Here's the key. 5 things. Focusing on measurement of reading ability. It's a critical priority. Then our curriculum priority should be increasing complexity in our curriculum, literally remapping or transforming our curriculum into instructional blueprints. Increasing inquiry inside of our instruction. That's our instructional priority. And we can do those together. I'm actually going to put those together because I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but focusing on inquiry and instruction. Our assessment priority is synthesis through writing and then developing our leadership teams in our buildings, not just our principals, our assistant principals, our leadership teams through specific targeted development. So let's move forward. Number 1, measurement of reading ability. A reminder that college and career readiness is about the ability to comprehend and apply increasingly complex ideas, to read or hear information, and then to analyze that information, to synthesize it, to then explain it or create new arguments around it using evidence, and then creating new products through writing or speaking. This is where we have to go. We cannot escape the real world around us. The drivers of change here, as a reminder, We have 1.2 million kids who aren't graduating from high school. And by the way, a reminder that those kids actually do better in courses where they get to think, do analysis and synthesis as compared to just rote memorization. But we also have nearly 1/2 of our kids who are going on to community college, nearly 1/4 of our kids who go on to 4-year universities, and they have to take remedial courses. We don't know where they are in their ability to read. They're not ready, and when they go to college, they feel like a failure and they drop out. What happens when you go to college for 2 years, you drop out, you have no degree, but you do have a lot of debt? We're trying to solve this problem, and this problem begins with reading. But reading in a very specific way, a very specific place. The Schmeiser study, we saw this in part 1. My ability to read complex, nonfiction, informational text, the kind of text I read in science, in mathematics. If I'm not prepared here, I'm not going to meet those higher benchmarks. I'm not going to be able to do well in college or workplace training. But if I start here, the results are exponential. So we know from part 1, I have this thing called the reading gap. The lower level is the average level of text complexity in my curriculum. That's where my kids are if they're on level today. I got to get them to that upper level. How do I get them to that upper level? Essentially, I have to know where they are, where they're reading, where they're starting, and then I have to measure their progress as I'm implementing complexity, inquiry, and synthesis. It is about the student's ability to read, and we measure that using especially Lexile, because I can measure the student's ability to read and the complexity of the text on the same framework. Remember, my kids in the 3rd grade, they have to get to a place where today in the 3rd grade where they really would be reading at the 5th grade. My kids in the 5th grade today, I have to get them in a place where they're reading content that they might not otherwise access until the 8th grade. The thing is that reading placement and progress monitoring data are the only method of measuring foundational college and career readiness. It is the only method. Look at the research regarding acceleration of reading, which we know all of our kids have to do. All of our kids, those who are on grade level, they have to accelerate by somewhere between 2 to 3 grade levels. All of the research on response to intervention talks about the requirement for that data, the placement data and progress monitoring. So priority number 1, you have to have the placement data. It must be available to you. You have to have the progress monitoring data on a pretty regular basis. You need to understand the data at hand and then use it to monitor and inform instruction. If we use it and we never change what we do, who cares, right? What was the use? But in a presentation to the Virginia Department of Education as early as February of 2012, Mark Shin out of National Louis University indicates that this kind of progress monitoring is not standard educational practice, even in special education. My friends, this is why it's a priority. We have to change it. Spend no money until you have this data. Find the data. Use the data. Districts have to, buildings have to have the information, reading ability for placement and progress monitoring. They have to know how to use it, and then they have to actually use it. Where are our students starting? So how do we do that? Well, you can go to Lexile.com. They have a lot of free resources. There are a number of commercial products you might get, and a lot of them are cheap. Achieve 3000, they provide a best-of-breed solely nonfiction assessment. It's called LevelSet. It was designed by Metametrics, the people who create Lexiles, and designed with one of the authors of the Common Core State Standards. You can't get any better than that, and it's cheap, by the way. And Achieve participates in the grant funding program here. NWEA, you might already have this information through the MAP test. Now, you might have to give the NWEA a couple more times so you can monitor progress, but look there. Look at your current state tests. A lot of states include Lexiles, but we're not using the data. Scholastic Reading Inventory is also Lexile. Now, that has fiction and nonfiction, so it might not be completely aligned to the Common Core, but it's better than nothing, right? I mean, it's still a good assessment. If you have Accelerated Reader uses the ATOS framework. ATOS has a crosswalk to Lexile. I don't care what you use. Please, please, we must measure reading ability. So, if you're going to pause now and discuss what you need to do to find out where your data is, the data at hand, and if you're folks know how to use it and how you can use it. Put it on your scorecard for every faculty meeting. We'll move forward to priorities number 2 and number 3 together, which are steps to increase complexity and embed inquiry. We're going to talk about them together because we're actually going to tackle them through the similar kinds of process. When we come to the discussion of complexity, I want to surface a red herring. Because some folks, they don't want to change, right? They don't want to change what they do. They don't want to change that piece of literature they've been teaching for 20 years. And so they will say, well, listen, we should look at things other than Lexile around when we look at text complexity. So let's just get it straight. Are Lexiles the only way to measure text complexity? No, they are not. I just told you a number of different ways that you could do that, including ATOS. Are Lexiles the only vertical scale, P20, to measure text complexity and student reading ability at the same time? Yes, they are, hands down. I don't care, though. Just get your reading data. Buy nothing before you get the data. But when you're thinking about complexity, please do not be misled. There are 3 elements of text complexity, that is qualitative, quantitative, and reader and task. But if you are not meeting the quantitative measurements, your students are not going to be able to read what is on the new assessments. Remember, the ACT looked forward and they found that somewhere around 2/3 of our kids would today flunk the new assessments. They would not meet the college and career readiness benchmarks because they cannot read complex text. 90% of our African American students. Many would like to avoid change by claiming that the themes in their content, that the themes are adequate. My friends, I don't care about the themes. It is the actual vocabulary. It is the sentence structure that needs to be complex. That's why we measure it using Lexiles. That's why our 3rd graders today have to start reading at a 5th grade level. Don't believe me? Let me give you an example right from the Assessment Consortia, a 7th grade analytical prose constructed response item. This is what our 7th graders would be expected to do. They're going to read the biography of Amelia Earhart. That is nonfiction text, right? They're going to write an essay that summarizes and explains the challenges that Earhart faced throughout her life using textual evidence. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to keep reading. We're going to read 2 more pieces of text. Earhart's Final Resting Place, a little bit easier, and Amelia Earhart's Life and Disappearance, a little bit more difficult. And then we're going to write again. We're going to analyze the strength of the arguments about Earhart's bravery in at least 2 of those texts. If I'm a little bit below reader, maybe I'm going to choose that text that's a little bit easier. I'm going to use textual evidence. That is the complexity. Nonfiction, informational text, multiple sources, writing. But still don't believe me? Let's go back to literature. Let's think about literature. Grade 10, literary analysis task. What is the definition of complexity in literature? In grade 10, we're going to require our students, again, this is from the Assessment Consortia, to read stuff like Ovid's Daedalus and Icarus and Anne Sexton's To a Friend Whose Work Has Come to Triumph. Now, I want you to think about, do your students read Ovid, Daedalus, and Icarus? Because in the most American curriculum, that content is not even provided to students unless they are in honors English or literature, advanced literature. And here, all your 10th graders are going to be expected to read and comprehend it. They're going to read Daedalus and Icarus and Anne Sexton, and then they're going to write an essay. They're going to write about how Sexton transforms Daedalus and Icarus. They might consider what's emphasized, absent, or different in the 2 texts, develop their own focus, use textual evidence. As a matter of fact, going deeper into complexity, they'll answer other questions like, here's a question about theme. Which of the following sentences best states an important theme about human behavior in Ovid's Daedalus and Icarus? But then, the next question, going further, going deeper, additional complexity, additional inquiry. Select 3 pieces of evidence from Ovid's Daedalus and Icarus that support your answer to Part A. I cannot answer this question if I have not read the text closely. Look at mathematics. It's the same way. In mathematics, here's a performance task. My student is going to have to read a complex scenario. I have Kevin and Shayna Johnson's mother. She received a couple of several high utility bills, I'm going to have to read those bills. I'm going to have to read an excerpt from Wikipedia on the concept of heating degree day. And then, this is math, I'm going to have to compare the gas bills. I'm going to have to estimate the savings from insulation and ceiling that Ms. Johnson had put in. And then I'm going to have to decide whether that work was actually cost effective, writing up my evidence and argument in mathematics. Complexity. I have to be able to read at a complex level in order to understand, and then I have to think and write. Let's keep going a little bit. Some other examples from the assessment consortia and the standards themselves. Let's go all the way down to kindergarten for a minute. The assessment question on your screen is the kind of assessment question I might see in mathematics. Kyla has some strawberries. She's going to give 4 strawberries to each of her 3 friends. How many strawberries will be left for Kyla? Directly from the Common Core documents themselves. This is the kind of question that we should be expecting my kindergartner to be able to do. First difference, there are words. Students should be able to read. Not only that, and by the way, where there are letters here, there would actually be numbers. We're not asking our students in kindergarten to do algebra yet, but I should be able to read. I should be able to solve for the product of addition or subtraction. And then look at the most advanced question here, down in the lower right-hand side. Grandma has C flowers. How many can she put in her red vase, and how many can she put in her blue vase? There's no one right answer to that, is there? That is critical thinking. That's actually getting at the mathematical concept. That requires greater inquiry in my approach to instruction. It also requires a different complexity of curriculum. Curriculum in kindergarten that has words. Same thing in first grade. Now I'm going to have more words in first grade, slightly more complex concepts like how many more or how many fewer. And in the mathematics, I'm going to be solving for different kinds of variables, different areas on that same mathematical sentence. Complexity is key. That's why we have priorities 2 and 3 for you as complexity and inquiry. I'm going to show you in a minute how we attack this, but let's look at a few more examples from the assessment consortia. So this is a grade 2 performance task. This is from engagenewyork.org. My first example is actually an example of what we might see today for greater than and less than. Here is the example for college and career readiness. I have a number line. I have 3 questions. Those questions are in increasing order of complexity. First of all, where would 85 be? I don't tell you that 85 is going to be just a notch over double 42, but you're going to put it on the number line. Then where would 21 be? I don't tell you that 21 is 1/2 of 42. I want to see if you figured that out. And then where would 31 be? 31, this answer is actually dependent upon where I put the 21, right? And you'll notice that it's just a tick below, halfway between 21 and 42. The critical issue here, in order to actually show with precision the understanding here, I'm going to put tick marks on my number line. I don't ask you to do it. I am seeing if the student figures that out in their modeling themselves. And then lastly, using English. Tell Carol why you knew where to place 31, why you knew it. Give the explanation for why. Writing. In the second grade, another example, I might teach students in the second grade when I am adding or subtracting to line the numbers up on the right, but that would actually be a wrong level of complexity in my instruction. Why? Because actually I'm not just adding them up on the right, I'm actually matching place values that have to do with that decimal. And I'm going to have to know that. I'm going to have to understand it when I get to the third grade and I have number sentences like this. Because if I just add them up on the right, I'm not going to be putting them in the correct way, right? It's all about the place value and the decimal. So teach line the decimal up. Here is an example in 4th or 5th grade mathematics. Again, you'll notice all the words here. By the way, on the new assessments, computational questions, we won't see many of them after the 4th grade. Most of the questions become like this, where I have to read. And so here with the McDonald's claims, Wikipedia reports that 8% of all Americans eat at McDonald's every day. In the U.S., there are 310 million Americans. 12,800 McDonald's. The average McDonald's store can serve 1,500 people a day. Do you believe that's true? Using mathematical evidence, defend your position. Is that a fact? an opinion, or an estimation. Well, I can't do this problem if I can't read it. By the way, that gets back to my Lexile and my measurement of reading ability. But also, I really need to reason through it. Now, we actually teach in the Black Belt program different strategies to actually unpack this problem as an exemplar. But you can teach a routine and operation to tackle this. But the reality is that if I don't have this in my curriculum, if I never have my students practicing and struggling through these, they're not going to be able to do well on the test because these are the kinds of questions on the new test. As a matter of fact, let's look at a high school exit exam. This is the kind of exit exam I might see today. On Monday, Lisa's fishbowl contained a gallon of water, and on Friday, the fishbowl contained 0.75 gallons of water. By what percentage did the amount of water in Lisa's fishbowl decrease? I like to say, who cares, right? I just put more water in. Here's the actual example from the assessment consortia for the 11th grade. I'm given a task where I have a square metal sheet. It's going to be made up into an open top water tank, so there's my water tank. I'm going to cut squares from the four corners of the sheet. So squares are geometrical shape with particular properties. And then I'm going to bend the four rectangular pieces up and weld them together to make a tank. Here's my question. How will the final volume of the tank depend upon the size of the squares cut from the corners? Well, in order to do this, actually what I need to do is I need to create a chart, and I need to actually do some modeling to look at which size square, the relationship between the side of the square and the volume. I'm going to need to know how I measure volume using this particular shape. And I'm going to describe my answer by sketching a rough graph. Notice it doesn't say making a chart. I assume that the student's going to be able to figure that out. Explaining the shape of the graph in my own words, it will be bell-shaped. And then writing an algebraic formula for the volume. The student who's going to do well here is the student who's going to figure out that the actual answer for greatest estimated volume is not a whole number, it's a decimal, and that in order to actually solve this, not to just estimate, you have to go into calculus. Lastly, I have to explain how large the four corners should be cut so that the resulting volume of the tank is as large as possible. I must change my curriculum to include complex items like this. But I not only have to change the complexity of my curriculum, I also have to change the teacher's method of inquiry. Because, for instance, here, the student has to understand a problem and figure out the best way to approach it. The first thing to do is creating that chart. It's a different kind of problem solving. Here's my last exemplar. You can see this equation, solve the following equation. Now you might think, well, that's going to be pretty easy. I'm just going to solve for x using algebra. But actually this is a timed problem, and the student's going to have a hard time solving it in the time allotted. What we actually want to get the student to see is that this is a particular form of problem. It's a quadratic equation. That the answer is going to be in the form q squared equals 2q. And that will allow them to pretty easily solve it. But guess what? There are actually two solutions, 2/3 or 4/3. So I need to make sure that as I'm actually solving equations in my classrooms, the student is looking at different kinds of equations and identify, oh, that's quadratic, and this is how to solve it quickly. Working on fluencies. Remember, one of the ways to get to fluency, though, is by getting rid of stuff that I'm not supposed to be teaching, so I have the time to do this discussion, to go in deep. We must understand the complexity that is inside of college and career readiness and the standards. So remember from part 1, stop deconstructing the standards. Your teachers cannot deconstruct them and come to an level of understanding that is appropriate because the standards are written in a different way. Use the deconstructed standards that's already been done for you. Also, don't modify your curriculum by just adding to it. That's our problem. We have to take away. We have to take away and we have to increase rigor in the alignment. So in mathematics, remove the stuff that we don't need to be teaching and make sure that we have the appropriate focus, especially K-8 in the fluencies. In English language arts and also in social studies science, pair nonfiction with cross-curricular focus. How do we do that? Well, when it comes to deconstruction, there are It's offered for free on a variety of state websites. You can go out and Google it. Not necessarily user-friendly, but you can use it. If you want a kind of a user-friendly, commercially put together type item, the Common Core Institute has a PDF. It is easily searchable. You can look at the various performance tasks there, all of the math fluencies, all of those items. Also, another free resource, corepedia.org. You can go out and look at the progressions in the standards, and that helps you identify the indicators of rigor. When it comes to increasing complexity, we know we need to increase nonfiction informational text between 1/2 and 70% of everything a student reads. So we can do that by pairing, especially current events. You saw that in part 1. Current events, nonfiction text with our literature. Achieve 3000 is a great resource. They participate in our grant-funded program, so you can use the teacher resources for free and then get a break on the student resources. I don't care if you go there. You use whatever you want, but you got to do it. This is a priority. Remember, though, you can change all that stuff. You can get Achieve 3000. You can change your library. You can do a lot more nonfiction. But if I'm not asking the right kinds of questions, I'm never going to drive the student to that level of inquiry that gets them ready to solve the kinds of problems they're going to face in the real world, let alone the assessments. So one of the things that you need to do is really build out the skills of your teachers. You also need to think about the kinds of vocabulary that your teachers are using. SpellingCity.com is a free resource where they have vocabulary lists not only at grade level but also at an advanced level. So you can have your teachers use the words, say, at the grade level above and say those words out loud. Remember, I have to say the words to work on the students' listening vocabulary, and that's going to drive their reading vocabulary. Our students who are coming into our schools who are behind are thousands of words behind in their listening vocabulary. We want to tackle that. That means our teachers are going to have to say those words. Here's an example of a progression from Corepedia. The progressions let us see the different levels of rigor. One of the things to understand is that when we think about the new assessments will not be scored right or wrong. They're scored on a scale of less rigor to grade level rigor to advanced rigor. Very much like the NAEP is scored. So here you can see that if I'm in 3rd grade, I would understand that if I'm performing below level, I'm asking and answering questions like who, what, why, where, and when, and I can demonstrate understanding of key details in the text. But the difference between that and grade level is actually asking and answering more advanced questions to demonstrate understanding of the whole text, and then referring explicitly to the text as the basis for those answers. That's the difference. That defines grade level. And if I'm going beyond, if I'm actually approaching mastery, the student can do that, and they can refer to details and examples in the text in explaining what the text says very explicitly and drawing higher level inferences from the text. By using the progressions, I can actually look at the key indicators of rigor, and that will lead me to focus my instruction and my classroom assessment. All of these items should go into your instructional blueprint. If you, I hate to say this because some people have already thought they have remapped their curriculum, and they've done it in a way that really doesn't make any sense for college and career readiness. But that said, we can just start an overlay process. When you're looking at your curriculum map, you want to transform it into a blueprint. Put the standards in it. That's where we have to start. Start with the language of the standards. Start with the indicators of rigor that we see in the progression. Then we have to look at the complexity of the content. Look at the Lexile. Think about what are the questions that I'm going to embed for student and teacher inquiry. Actually put those questions in the map. Then think about the vocabulary that I'm going to use for listening and speaking. How am I going to get at discrete vocabulary study? What's the vocabulary list for my teachers to say? Lastly, what's the depth of knowledge that is required by the assessment consortia, and how am I going to show that? What kind of product am I going to have inside of my student work? You're not going to learn this overnight, and I really suggest that you have someone help you, take you through a process. There are a variety of people who might, but do make sure that they understand Common Core, complexity, inquiry, depth of knowledge. A shout out to one of our partners. Again, University of Southern California, Rossier. There is now a Common Core Black Belt program. It's a course, it's a graduate level course. You get graduate credit. It's designed just for an hour a month, and then you have some on-site work. But it actually takes you through a process where you're mapping, starting with your Lexile and your complexity, your instructional practice elements, looking at the cross-curricular alignment, looking at high-fidelity instructional implementation, then actually digging into the assessment types from PARCC and Smarter Balance. You have to understand those assessment types if you're going to understand what is determining that level of complexity and rigor. Lastly, coherence and sequence and accommodation for students who are behind. So please do make sure that you're getting some help in looking through your maps. There is a specific process here to make sure you're addressing complexity and inquiry. The good news is you can actually tackle both at the same time. Also, be thinking about your library materials. Remember, if your students in the 5th grade are going to be reading at where students are today in the 8th grade, we have some migration of materials to do there, including kind of across buildings. When it comes to measurement, your librarians or media specialists, they should actually be functioning almost as a consultant to you. They should be able to tell you the Lexile level of the materials that are circulating. So for instance, if your teachers are implementing, you should start to see a greater level of Lexile in the books that your teachers are helping your students read and in your circulation. But please address your curriculum blueprints, your curriculum maps. Start with the issues of complexity. Use the language of the standards and use the power of the purse. Only purchase things that are aligned to that level of complexity in the standards. Pairing fiction with nonfiction, again, I already mentioned Achieve as a resource there, and they have some things that they are willing to offer for free. And then include the questions. As a matter of fact, you can include right there. I'll give you access to free questions, Bloom's critical Q questions, but include the questions in your curricular map. Text-dependent questions, higher order thinking questions. So in that instructional blueprint where your teachers are looking to see what they're supposed to teach, they have real-world helps. Remember, you can change all your stuff, but if you don't change inquiry, if you don't help that teacher change the questions they ask, it will result in student failure because the kids have to go deeper. A few other resources here. The Common Core Studio. Any of the professional development that the Common Core Institute does, they actually give you access to the Common Core Studio. It has a full content library in it. It also has templates for mapping that curriculum and doing online instruction planning. Very powerful, and it's included in the professional development. There are also some really simple tools, which I like because a lot of folks are resistant to change and technology, and they forget. So you might want to get these, or you might want to do it yourself. Common Core Lesson Planner looks kind of like a lesson diary for math, for English language arts, and also for both. These are simple. They're not perfect. But what it does is it reminds the teacher of the core critical routines that they should be doing in the classroom to meet the requirements for complexity and inquiry. You're never going to get there if we don't provide our teachers with job-embedded supports that are relatively simple to use. So, our first priority was measuring reading ability. The second and third were complexity and inquiry. Let's go on to the fourth priority. You might want to pause for a moment if you're listening to this in a group and asking yourself, how can we help to increase complexity and inquiry? Have we started our curriculum mapping process yet? How do we make sure that we do that in a way that addresses these issues? How do we make sure that we are actually embedding the inquiry right into what is in that curriculum blueprint? Okay, so you might want to pause here. I'm going to go on. Our next priority then is synthesis through writing. This is our priority for assessment. We're going to start with some new research data, which is from the 2011 NAEP in writing. That is the National Assessment of Educational progress. The 2011 Writing NAEP was the first one ever done on the computer. We know some really interesting things because it was done on the computer, and it's now the new benchmark. All future Writing NAEPs will be benchmarked to the 2011 findings. So what do we know? Well, the first thing we know is that just over a quarter of our kids actually are proficient or advanced in their ability to write. You're starting to see a trend here. Somewhere between a quarter and a third of our kids are actually ready for college or career readiness, and the rest of our students are not, right? And so we found that on the NAEP, the rest of our students were below proficient. And actually, very similar to that ACT forecast, if you look at the demographics, about 90% of our African American students are not ready. They failed. They were below proficient. 80-some percent, about 85% of our Hispanic students did not pass with proficiency or advanced. So what we're seeing here is a trend, and what it says is that we have a lot of work to do. But the thing is, with the NAEP, it's so powerful because it told us precisely and specifically what to do. So I'm going to tell you that really it's just up to us to implement. First of all, I would note that the Common Core standards and the NAEP are directly aligned. They draw from each other, okay? Well, the standards actually draw from the NAEP. So the kind of writing that we're doing, we need to be doing more persuasive writing. We need to be writing to specific, authentic audiences. We need to be writing after reading multiple sources. We need to be writing using evidence and argument, period, hands down, okay? And that's all in the standards. But also, one of the things that we found is that the students who more frequently use technology, use the computer to draft and revise their writing did much higher. And by the way, the students who didn't do well, who weren't using the computer, they indicated they had access, they just weren't required to use it. So, number one, have your students change the culture. Have your students write using the computer every week. Some other things that we found. Students who wrote 4 to 5 pages weekly did so much better. Think about it. That's a page a day. It's a half page a day, actually, if you break that up between English language arts and social studies. So students have them write 4 to 5 pages weekly, use the technology, and use the thesaurus. That's another really interesting thing that we found, and it goes back to that issue of inquiry and complexity. The students who use the thesaurus, who are interested in very specific vocabulary use and the meanings of words, they did so much better. We can get you the NAEP report. It also has links to a variety of different resources, one task for each writing purpose, a scoring rubric, samples of responses so you can see it, and the student performance data. Please, the NAEP tells us exactly what to do, and it's aligned exactly with the information from the Assessment Consortia. Look, this slide, it's direct from the Assessment Consortia. In English language arts, we're going to engage with complex text. Then we're going to extract evidence from that complex text through inquiry, right? We're going to employ that evidence. We're going to employ it to build knowledge through writing. We're going to do that in social studies, science, mathematics across the curriculum. You already saw this. Remember that Amelia Earhart 7th grade example. I read the biography, then I wrote an essay that summarized. Then I read 2 more pieces, and then I wrote an essay that analyzed the strength of the arguments. We know how to do this, guys. The NAEP tells us we just have to write between 4 to 5 times a week. We have to use technology. We have to use the thesaurus. And it's the same thing in mathematics. Here's another example, an exemplar in the 7th grade. I'm going to have to read advanced text. I'm going to have to figure out the requirements of my performance task. Here I'm going to be designing a new set of coins. Read very carefully, look at the mathematical evidence, and then design my set of coins and explain why it came to that particular design. This is the culmination, the assessment, the synthesis of reading complex text in math, in English language arts, increasing complexity of my curriculum, delving deeper through inquiry, and then finally creating that synthesis through writing. So that's the priority. So require weekly use of the computer for writing, 4 to 5 pages multi-source writing per week. I would say pair up English and language arts and social studies and pair up math and science. Have it happen in math too. You're going to have to write in math on those new assessments because that's what we do in the real world. Use the thesaurus. Get at that specific vocabulary. That's easy to do if you're redoing those blueprints and you're putting the vocabulary there. Present orally. Have your students present orally. By the way, a reminder that your students who are advanced, if they're presenting their content orally, you're helping your students who are behind because they're hearing that more advanced vocabulary. And require evidence-based questions. Okay? This is priority number 4. So you might want to pause. You might want to discuss how you actually get your folks to write 1 page a day or 4 to 5 pages weekly. Remember, one of the things that we don't do, one of the reasons we don't do enough writing is because we're afraid we have to grade everything. What the research says, I don't have to grade all that writing. Students receive just as much good pedagogy there when they actually are speaking to each other about their writing. Also, a great strategy is having your folks do larger tasks where my students are writing over and they're doing it over time, but I'm only grading the final performance task, okay? So all of those things. You might want to pause. Otherwise, let's talk about how we actually lead these changes. I've given you 4 priorities. How do we lead this kind of change? Question for you. What is the RAND Foundation, the Wallace Foundation, the folks at Stanford, the United States Department of Education, what do they all and others agree upon? That investment in the principal as the leader is the single most cost-effective use of your time and your money, and it has a huge impact. Note, this is a study, a finding just from January 2012 from the Wallace Foundation on principals. Particularly noteworthy is the empirical measurable link between school leadership and improved student achievement. We're requiring so much of our principals now. They have to go into the classroom to observe, evaluate our teachers. They are the coach. They are the on-demand coach for change. All of these items I've just been talking about, if they don't understand it, how are they ever going to lead their teachers, especially the teachers who don't want to do it, to do it? The principal and the building leadership team, assistant principal, the key coaches, the department heads, they are ground zero for community and parent communication. They're the folks who help our community members and our parents understand these shifts. We know that that empirical link between school leadership and student achievement happens when the principal and the leadership team become the instructional leaders. The hard part is that this team is often seen as too busy, and we don't provide them with specific targeted professional development to their needs. Instead, we just invite them to whatever we're doing for the teachers. Look at the Title II dollars that you're spending on teacher professional development, even one-offs reaching every teacher, instead of actually going deeper and investing in that leader. We will not get to sustainable change if we do not help the leader address their own skill deficits. You're not going to know all of the elements that we've gone through here today, and I'm just pointing out 4 priorities to start with. This is a process over time. So remember, there are things we can do. We can reach everyone. We can reach all of our teachers with simple tools, right? And our progress toward implementing college and career readiness is going to be built by volunteers, going to be built by the folks who say, yes, I want to do it first. Let's do the same thing with our principals. Ask our principals, who wants to participate? Our assistant principals, our department heads, who wants to go deeper? This is a multi-year effort. We don't have to do it all at once, but I will remind you the national pathway for implementing the Common Core, which is based on the best-of-breed research from the National Science Foundation, says that we must be investing in leadership, period. We have the Common Core Black Belt team. They might be principals, they might be district leaders, they could be curriculum people, they could be teachers. But then I develop my lead coaches and teachers and my building leadership. They're the folks who have to lead implementation of curriculum, instruction, and assessment. I want to show you some new data that actually bolsters my argument here, why this is such a critical priority. In part 1 of this session, we showed you a graph from the ACT on college and career readiness. That was from 2012. I'm going to show you the updated information, excuse me, that was from 2011. I'm going to show you the update from 2012. Once again, only 1/4 of our students meet the college and career readiness benchmarks for all 4 subjects. Just over half in reading, just under half in math, 31% in science. That's a little uptick from, literally a 1% uptick from 2011, and yet still only 25% meet all 4 benchmarks. But here's the thing. Those students were taking the core curriculum. Take it now into intervention. The students who are not in my core curriculum. And those students do so much significantly worse. It is the principal and the building leadership team who are involved in IEPs, who are involved with our students who need additional help, who are actually responsible for accelerating them into that core curriculum. If we do not understand these shifts, I cannot lead that change. Also consider, last year, for the students that we sent to 2-year colleges, 41% of those students had mastered none of the college and career readiness benchmarks. None of them. For the students that we sent to 4-year private colleges and universities, about 30% of them had mastered only 1/2 of the college and career readiness benchmarks. 10% of them had mastered none. So the ACT, they tell us our kids want to go to college, right? This was very interesting data. The vast majority of all students across all demographics see themselves going to get a bachelor's degree, much more so even than going on to get a 2-year degree across all the demographics. But we know that when they get to college, they often don't because they're not prepared. They struggle, they fail, they have to take remediation, they have a lot of debt, and they drop out. So the ACT has given us very specific recommendations based upon this research and years, decades of research. Infuse a culture of post-secondary success all the way down to kindergarten. It is the building leadership team that creates that culture. Expand rigorous courses. It is the building leadership team that does that. Ensure early monitoring. That goes back to priority number 1. And not only monitor, but then intervene. It is the building leadership team that is responsible for that integrates that data into the faculty meetings. My friends, we're not going to win if we don't accomplish this support. There are actually 7 key skills for building leadership team members, for principals and their teams that we must address. 1, you have to know what the indicators of rigor are for college and career readiness in the grades in your building, hand down. If you don't know what the indicators of rigor are, you can't see it, you can't address it, you can't act. 2, you have to believe and then be able to articulate a vision of high-performance, college-bound culture for all of our students as early as kindergarten. We have to identify the college and career readiness instructional practices. You got to do that anyway for the Marzano, Danielson pieces, but at a higher level of rigor, I have to say, than the frameworks that are very general. I have to be able to coach. I have to be able to model rigorous dialogue. When I'm doing those classroom observations, when a teacher has a question, I have to be able to help them, to show them. If I say, oh, I'll get you some help, let's send you to a seminar, it's too late. It's that on-demand help and feedback. I have to be able to find, use progress monitoring data, understand it, and then actually lead with it. Take action. I need to require aligned, rigorous curriculum, and I need to be able to know it when I see it and know what is not aligned, right? Know what is not rigorous. And I need to be putting into practice those key critical elements for sustainable implementation. Your building leadership teams, they're not going to learn these things overnight either. So please tackle them. There are a variety of ways. Again, I'm going to talk about a program through the University of Southern California, Rossier, where you can get graduate credit. By the way, I really believe in graduate level programs because it isn't just a day of professional development. They are processes. You're getting something that also applies as a credential. You can get semester units or CEUs. In some districts, you can actually get higher pay because of it. But you want to make sure that it's really targeted to what it is you need to know. So here, we talked about this in part 1. This program is designed to be just 1 hour per month. And it's 1 hour per month because it's targeted. What are the look-fors? What are the 5 practices I need to be doing? Where to spend my time? Where to spend my money? Measuring progress. What kind of data should I use? How do I create that culture? How do I look at assessments? How do I actually create and lead the kind of assessment activity that the new assessment consortia are expecting? So consider the Principals Academy. Also, there are a variety of institutes that are happening across the country. They are 1- and 2-day institutes, and you can take them in sequence. They also carry graduate credit. So if you don't want to do the black belt, maybe you want to take your teams through that series. The whole issue here is consistency, doing it more than once. It actually leads to a kind of a crescendo with the capstone practicum strand at the National Conference on College and Career Readiness. Remember, you, the leadership, you are the most important. Teach knowledge. It's all about building capacity. I don't care how you do it, but we have to build capacity in our schools. More free resources. Schools Rock. This is social media. They tweet best practices and also use Facebook to talk about best practices. We already talked about corepedia.org. There's lots of free stuff too. So your reflection question. What does an English language arts or social studies or science classroom look like? What do the blueprints look like for their new curriculum? What kind of questions do I embed in there so they are actually digging deeper, so they are inquiring with text-dependent questions or higher order thinking skills, so that they're asking questions and the students are doing those kinds of performance tasks. So they're doing the synthesis with the writing tasks. How do you know where your students are reading and where they need to go? How are you measuring their progress? How is your math instruction different if your students have to master the kinds of examples that we've shown here today? In kindergarten, examples with more text. That example with the number line in the 2nd or the 3rd grade. The example at the high school level where I don't know how to tackle the problem. I have to be providing my students with problems and just letting them tackle it on their own instead of teaching them specific computation or skills. How do you get at that? How do you lead that? What are you going to do? These are just the 4 critical priorities and then the investment in our leadership. So in summary, please measure early and often the ability of your students to read, measured in Lexile, hopefully looking at matching that to the complexity of text. Map to the real complexity, the complexity that includes inquiry and is Lexile based. Embed inquiry and give time. Remember, you can't do inquiry, you can't get complex if you don't take away the stuff that is too simple, that you don't have to teach anymore. Get rid of the crud so that we can focus and go more deeply. Remember, in mathematics, it's a lot about those math fluency skills. Please implement the recommendations of the 2011 NAEP. Synthesis through writing and speech, it is critical, and it is the core skill for preparing for the assessments. And develop our leaders so they can lead this change, so that they can be a coach, they can be an instructional leader. We know that our students will do better as our leaders know more. Let me help you. Again, we have grant funds. We have our partners who are participating in different grant programs. You'll get an information request form, or you can just email tim.edwards@collegecareer.org, and we can get you the NAEP documents, the ACT research, all of those items. You have them at hand. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Kevin Baird, kevin.baird@collegecareer.org. If you are interested in providing professional development to your school board or community groups or foundations, I'm actually personally funded to do that, so I can do that for you kind of on your own, on the cheap, sometimes for free, sometimes just for expenses. Resources. You're going to get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. Corepedia.org, Lexile.com, those are free. CommonCoreInstitute.org, also Achieve3000.com, all kinds of things to use. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't come off as a downer. I hope you see that it's doable. The NAEP tells us what to do, but invest in yourself. Learn how to lead this change in a real, specific, and targeted way. Thanks so much, and see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.